Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, September the 29th, 2025. Today I want to look at Pluto in Aquarius. Now Pluto has been in Aquarius for some time, since November of last year, but I thought it would be a good idea to just see how Pluto in Aquarius has been working so far. And I think the impact of Pluto in Aquarius is quite serious. I think that it's not just about AI, it's also about personal freedom and the power of the state. And I think this is particularly the case in Europe so far. Maybe in other parts of the world that I'm not quite so familiar with. I'm in the US here, but it does seem that Europe is in the eye of the storm as far as Pluto in Aquarius is concerned. But before I look at Pluto in Aquarius, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Monday, September the 29th, 2025. And so here is the chart for today, set for noon in New York. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So turning to this chart, the moon at noon New York time is in Capricorn, and the moon moves into Capricorn, at 10:55 a.m. London time. So sort of late morning if you're in Europe, the moon will move into this sign. If you're in the Americas, the moon would have gone into Capricorn, in the middle of the night. So we're starting to see a change, the moon moving out of Sagittarius into Capricorn. Now, moon moving out of Sagittarius, what that means is that the moon is no longer in a fire sign, and there aren't any other planets except for Neptune and maybe, if you're interested, Chiron in fire signs. And so some of us might experience this as sort of a reduction in energy. There might be sort of less action, less spark. It's always good to have a bit of fire around. Maybe I'm biased. I've got my sun in Gemini, moon in Aries. My sun in Gemini can just get too wrapped up in two-dimensional ideas, and sometimes you need that extra spark to make life meaningful. And I don't know, other people might regard having no fire or very little fire as being a good thing. It perhaps makes things sort of easier to manage. There's less action. And, with the moon in Capricorn, the moon is fallen in Capricorn. Sorry, it's in its detriment in Capricorn. Because it rules Cancer, so it's in its detriment in Capricorn. So, the moon in Capricorn can be quite selfish, can focus on its own sort of material interests. And, we don't just have moon in Capricorn, we have the moon, starting to make a trine to Venus in Virgo. But aside from that trine, Venus is in Virgo, moon is in Capricorn. So these two feminine planets are both in signs that traditionally don't work too well for them. Moon in Capricorn in its detriment, in Venus in Virgo is fallen, and because of this, there may be something about the atmosphere today which is rather transactional. People thinking about how they can benefit, and Venus is a planet of relationships, and it's approaching the South Node. And sort of later in the week, Venus will be exactly conjunct the South Node. But I think we're starting to see the effect there. And that might add to the transactionality of the times we're living in. And, times we're living in quite a short term. That's probably a bit of an exaggeration. Just over the next few days, things could be quite transactional. But maybe with Moon in Capricorn, Venus in Virgo, people are thinking about how they can benefit, how they can lose, and what purpose do other people have? Of course, that is rather a harsh way of looking at things. And things can be harsh, especially as Well, Moon square Saturn. I mean, Moon isn't really set square Saturn unless you're in perhaps Australia or New Zealand. I mean, because they're in sort of it's a dissociate square, but the Moon is kind of in a 90 degree aspect to Saturn. So perhaps at the beginning of the day, things might be especially sort of difficult, and it might not feel that things are necessarily moving as the moon moves through sort of late Sagittarius. And yeah, there could be a sense of frustration, and then when the moon moves into Capricorn, things will become a little easier. Though we shouldn't forget that the moon in Capricorn is making a square to Neptune in Aries. So moon square Neptune, very different energies. I mean, moon in Capricorn wants things to be done properly. Moon in Capricorn is certainly looking after its own financial interests, but Neptune in Aries has different ideas, and we might find that, despite our best efforts, some of our attempts to boost our material position sort of get confused, get sidetracked, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. And then the moon moves on and it makes a sextile to Mars. And moon sextile Mars, I would have regarded that as being a good aspect. I think it's pretty fortunate. I mean, it's not an exciting aspect, but it allows us to get things done, and we can do things in our own way. Mars is in Scorpio. It is about division. Well, Mars as a planet is about division. My interests, your interests, perhaps. What makes me different from you? Trying to protect myself, for example, by creating boundaries. And so moon sextile Mars, is an aspect that, does allow us to protect our own interests. And then the moon in Capricorn, well, the sun is in Libra, so we've got a first quarter moon. Now that first quarter moon, it might be late on Monday, might be early on Tuesday. So if you're in the Americas, it's late on Monday, the first quarter moon. And the first quarter moon, it just tells us something about where we're at with the lunar cycle. So we had a new moon just over a week ago at 29 Virgo, and now we're seeing how that lunar cycle has progressed. And Sun in Libra, square moon in Capricorn. Well, Sun in Libra sounds quite accommodating, balance, making sure everything is fair, perhaps. But then moon in Capricorn is saying, well, yeah, it's all very well trying to be fair, trying to compromise, but you have to look after your own interests, and it's emotionally important to look after your own interests. And so maybe this is the crisis that some of us are feeling. Things have reached a certain stage where we do have to look after ourselves, and we shouldn't therefore see the moon in Capricorn as necessarily being a problem, because it's not a problem. And with the moon in Capricorn, I mean, I know it has a bad reputation, but I think it's quite important, the moon in Capricorn. And I mean, it's important. It reminds us of an important principle, that we do need some sense of sort of self-preservation. And from a dignity perspective, the moon does rule the earth signs by night. Venus rules the earth signs by day, moon by night. And so it's not such a bad position for the moon in Capricorn. It's the same with Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo. Venus is in Virgo. Not such a great sign for Venus to be in, but Venus does rule the earth signs by day, and so that's a broad picture. In fact, not a huge amount going on today. I mean, I did a video for the week ahead, and I really don't think that this week, at least on paper, there's a massive amount going on. Perhaps we get a break, but that's just astrologically. Of course, we're looking at things, theoretically. And of course, when you've got new moons, we've just had a new moon a week ago. The influence of that new moon will hang around, And when something aspects that new moon, for example, we might see an effect. So just because astrologically we don't see any exact aspects today, or indeed over the course of the next week, no exact aspects of great significance, doesn't mean that nothing will happen. So that's the picture for New York. Let's switch to Sydney, Australia. So noon in Sydney, the moon is at 26 degrees Sagittarius. And so that means if you are in Australasia, you don't really get that moon in Capricorn until sort of late in the day, or until this evening. And so perhaps in Sydney, the main aspect is, moon in Sagittarius square Saturn in Pisces. And the same applies for Australasia in general. And okay, you don't have moon in Capricorn, but you do have moon square Saturn. And so moon square Saturn, well, moon in Sagittarius is perhaps all the things you'd like to be doing, all the things you'd like to be saying. But square Saturn, you may hit an obstacle, or you might find that you have to change what you want to say to take into account external realities, or not just what you want to say, but what you want to do. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And so here's a chart. Mercury is starting to make a conjunction to Mars. So over the next couple of days, there will be a Mercury-Mars conjunction, which is potentially quite verbal. We've got things to say. We've got things that perhaps we feel we need to say. We might get annoyed, and if we get annoyed, well, we're going to have to say something. We can't just let it just sit and rot. That does matter. Though I don't think that Mercury-Mars conjunction is necessarily that spectacular. Mercury, remember, heliocentrically, Mercury moves very quickly, and it's almost like the moon. So the moon has a role in a geocentric chart. Its process, its action moves very quickly, but in a heliocentric chart there isn't a moon. Well, you could put the moon in, but it would be in exactly the same place as the Earth. So instead you rely on Mercury, and to a lesser extent Venus, for the action in the chart. And additionally, don't forget Saturn and Uranus. Heliocentric Saturn is at 2847 Pisces. Heliocentric Uranus is at 2850 Taurus. So they are now very, very close to that sextile. And with that sextile, perhaps we can feel the tension. Uranus is about the desire for freedom. Saturn is about the desire to restrict. And those two planets are coming together. And it might make people restless. Not necessarily on an individual level, but more on a sort of collective level. You, for example, might look at the UK when you've got this announcement about digital ID cards. People are not happy about that, and there are other countries where people are not happy, and people can see restriction, but they're also very aware of the desire for freedom. So that could be seen as a Saturn sextile Uranus issue, though I think you could also argue that it's a Pluto in Aquarius issue, and I will be talking about that later in the video. But let me now look at the astrology of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, September the 29th, 2025. Aries, you are at the moment quite serious and perhaps self-contained. You are of the view that maybe only you can do it. If you get other people's help, well, can you really rely on them? You do know, of course, that the Sun is moving through Libra and Mercury is moving through Libra. And of course, traditionally, from an Aries perspective, having the Sun and Mercury in Libra would indicate a time where you have to think about other people, their impact. It can be a sort of classic time for relationships to prosper. I mean, at least in a astrology sense, if you look at your weekly or month or particularly monthly horoscope and you see what people are saying, probably from an Aries view they'll be talking about relationships because the Sun is in Libra, your opposite sign, every year. But right now I'm not convinced that relationships are of any great interest to you, or if they are, you just might not really be able to express yourself in that sort of interpersonal and emotional sense. And there is something harsh, certainly restrained about you. You have to you do have to look after yourself, and you do know that there are things that need to be done, and you cannot rely on other people. I think that is something you're really beginning to feel as the moon moves into Capricorn, and so the seriousness might not feel entirely you, but it is the right approach. And I would have thought, Aries, the less people know about your true motivations, the better. And at the moment, you're going to be quite good at hiding. Now, hiding is not something that you normally associate Aries with. Aries likes to be open, upfront, very clear about what they want. But today, there may be certain advantages in keeping your motivations and intentions to yourself. You don't really want to talk about them. If people really knew what you were thinking, they might have their doubts, they might have their suspicions. So probably Aries, the less said, the better, and just get on with it, and also accept perhaps that with this first quarter moon coming up, it might be a moment of decision where you have to do something. You hadn't necessarily wanted to do it, but it might almost feel like now or never. And so you've got the moon in Capricorn square the Sun in Libra. So you could say that the Sun in Libra is essentially about the way you have been doing things, and you perhaps have been more accommodating than usual with the Sun moving for your opposite sign. But yeah, the moon in Capricorn is creating a challenge. It's saying, well, that's all very well, but you can't please all the people all the time. And what about you? And so that might be the challenge here. And it's not like that you have to completely abandon other people or be horribly selfish or anything like that. You have to work out what matters for you and how far you can go, because you just cannot be totally accommodating. As an Aries, you're not someone who has a reputation for being accommodating, and so you could say in some ways you are being true to form, but at the same time, Aries is not a sign that is known for being selfish and materialistic. Okay, there are always going to be selfish and materialistic Arians, but if one wants to make a generalization, you're not like that. But sometimes you have to be selfish, and it might be boring, but you've got things to do. And if you're working today, I think that you can really do a good job. You can start off on the right note. Start the week on the right note. And if you do put yourself first, then I don't think you'll regret it. And as far as relationships are concerned, whatever those relationships are, I'm not convinced you're really going to be in the mood. I think that you're going to find it difficult to get really close to any one person, especially on an emotional level, and you're not going to want to reveal things. I mean, which, yeah, it's not very Aries. Aries likes to be open and honest, but right now it's best to keep things to yourself. And if you do that, okay, you might not be a fun person to have around, but it's not all about fun, is it? Taurus. The moon is starting to move into Capricorn, out of Sagittarius into Capricorn, and that's not a bad thing from a Taurian perspective. You need something to stand on. You need some reality in your life. I mean, you've already got Venus in Virgo. It's great that Venus is in Virgo from a Taurian perspective, and Virgo is an earth sign, and of course the moon has just gone into Capricorn, which is an earth sign. So the moon and Venus are both in signs which are friendly to Taurus, your sign, and so things are starting to move on a material level. Sometimes Taurus, it can be very frustrating when things don't move. You try to have an impact on the material world, and it just stays stuck, and you just get annoyed, and you keep moving, you keep trying, and it just doesn't work. But now things can start to shift. So if you have been feeling a bit frustrated recently, or perhaps you have found it difficult to really apply yourself to anything specific, then now might be the time to to create change and to create movement. And it's so important to create movement, especially if you're a Taurus. Especially if you're a Taurus, because being a Taurus, things can get stuck. At all levels, spiritual, physical, psychological, and now you have the opportunity to make things happen. But don't forget, Taurus, that Venus is your ruler, and Venus is moving towards a conjunction with the South Node. And this is not something I've really talked about before. I mean, I've been aware that Venus and the South Node are in the same sign, but now they're getting close. I mean, they're sort of less than 6 degrees apart. And what this does mean is that you may be encouraged to do things which perhaps you should have moved away from, or even grown out of. And the South Node is in Virgo, and so with the South Node in Virgo, yeah, it's important to look at the material world, to be aware of the details of the matter, but you can get over-focused on the material. And that's perhaps one of the things that Venus on the South Node is starting to tell you. I don't think you need to worry about it right now, although perhaps the moon moving into Capricorn is maybe emphasizing a Venus conjunct the South Node. Now, I've said about the moon in Capricorn that it can be quite selfish, and Venus in Virgo can be quite transactional. But I think the Venus in Virgo could be super transactional when it's conjunct the South Node. Now, that depends what kind of Taurus you are, to an extent. I mean, it's sort of easy to say that Taurians are only concerned about money and the material stuff. Of course, that's not true. I mean, there are many Taurians who are very spiritual and couldn't care less about the material world. Perhaps because they've moved on, they've moved to another level, and so it does depend. But sometimes a Taurus can just get too focused on surface appearances and what things look like on the surface, and that just could be the problem with Venus conjunct the South Node. And so just be aware of it, not just today, but over the next few days until that aspect becomes exact. Though I don't think I don't think it should be a problem. I think that, as far as I can see, if you handle things right, I think it should be a great day. The next couple of days should be pretty good because the moon is in Capricorn today, and tomorrow it will be making a trine to Venus, and so you can not just motivate yourself, but you may be able to motivate other people. There is a sextile between the moon and Mars, and Mars might represent someone who is difficult to budge. They have strong opinions. They're also quite strong in themselves, but maybe with moon in Capricorn sextile Mars, there is a way of getting people to move, perhaps changing their mind, or perhaps to pay attention to you. And of course, you're going to be helped by your verbal skills, which continue to be good. But it could also be that you can attract someone's curiosity. And so, if you are in a situation where you are, trying to get someone to move, get something to sort of do something, then just perhaps attract their attention with the possibility of giving them some interesting information, or you could just make them worried. Indicate to them that you know something that they don't, and that may be enough to motivate them and to perhaps get them to relax, get them to calm down, get them to give you a chance. Gemini. Moon moving into Capricorn. Capricorn is a sign which Geminis sometimes find it difficult to deal with. I mean, traditionally, Gemini and Capricorn is not the greatest contact. They don't really have anything in common. But, when you've got Moon in Capricorn, it does force you, Gemini, to reluctantly, look at things, in a different way. And perhaps you have to, ask questions that you didn't really want to have to answer. And you're asking yourself those questions. And the moon in Capricorn, is also the first quarter moon, and so you had a new moon a week ago. It was at 29 Virgo. The sun is now in Libra, and so the moon is square the sun. And so, what this might mean, Gemini, this first quarter moon, is that there are things that you are very excited about, that are very, very motivating, and at least you find them motivating and you find them interesting, but you're challenged because you're being perhaps asked to justify them, justify yourself even, and maybe justify things in a way that is really quite sort of down to earth and material, and that's not really anything you particularly wanted to do. Why not just enjoy yourself? You shouldn't have to worry about money and practicality, but circumstances might force you to, and so perhaps that's a challenge, as there may be an unwelcome intrusion of a financial reality. You kind of knew it. You thought it would just go away all by itself, but it hasn't gone away. So that might be a way in which the moon square sun works, that first quarter moon. Or it could just be that you just have to look at something in greater detail than you wanted. Some Geminis do like to work on the surface, and they don't want to get too involved with emotional complications and other people's emotional complications. They want to just, give their mind sort of free rein and go where their creative spirit takes them. And then you have to deal with moon in Capricorn, and yeah, that's not what you wanted. But you shouldn't resent it. I think that you're being, shown how you should be doing things. It's perhaps forcing you to be sort of more responsible. And the moon does make a sextile to Mars, and this moon sextile Mars, it's an aspect that is down to earth, and it's very active, but active in a very grounded way. So it may be, Gemini, that this moon sextile Mars encourages you to sort things out, and if there's something you want to do and you think it's absolutely amazing, great, but you're going to have to make sure that you've done the groundwork, and perhaps that moon sextile Mars will help you in that direction. And also with the moon square Mars, moon sextile Mars, it could be that some Geminis have been just a little bit negligent about health. I mean, at least you might think that you've been negligent about health. There's something you should have been doing or not doing over the last few months, maybe, but you didn't really think about it. And the moon sextile Mars just might encourage you to just stop and think, well, hold on. It's some simple change. It could make you feel healthier, fitter, and more balanced. And why not put that change into action like right now? It won't be so difficult. I mean, I'm not giving you health advice here, by the way. It's, as always, it's just about lifestyle, but it's something that you just might want to consider. And finally, just a reminder that Venus is moving towards a conjunction of the South Node, and it is possible that Geminis are perhaps too focused on certain aspects of maybe their home environment, or on things that just feel familiar. Now, Gemini is supposed to be a sign that likes the new, likes to be adventurous, but still, things that are familiar, they might just be safer. And at the moment, with the South Node in Virgo, with Venus in Virgo as well, with Venus making a conjunction to the South Node, familiarity could be a problem, and you're not reaching out as much as you should be, and you're not perhaps listening to what other people are trying to tell you, and perhaps you're also interpreting things just in your own way, according to your own past. The past is still weighing in on you, and the past was great, but you do have to address the future. And I think that the first quarter moon was trying to tell you this as well. So I think, Gemini, there is a situation brewing where you need to address complexity and address something that may relate to responsibility, and being able to look at something in a deeper way, because Gemini can be a superficial sign, and I'm saying it as a Gemini myself. I mean, I try my hardest not to be superficial, but I can be superficial. I can be as superficial as any Gemini, and so it's not a time for superficiality. And you have to ask what might be the reason for superficiality, and the reason for superficiality is comfort, because you perhaps at some level don't want to stray from what you know and trust. Cancer. It's a first quarter moon coming up. Okay, it might be this evening if you're in the Americas, Monday evening. It could be tomorrow morning if you're somewhere else. But the first quarter moon is a relatively important event, and it can be challenging. So we did have a new moon just over a week ago at 29 degrees Virgo. That was the partial eclipse, and the moon has moved on, and now we've got the moon in Capricorn square the sun in Libra, and this square might be a representative of something you have to address that maybe you don't really want to address. And you could argue that, with the sun in Libra, you like things to be done in a particular way. You're just getting comfortable. I mean, Cancerians like to, get comfortable somewhere, somewhere where they feel sort of safe and secure. And then the moon makes a square to the sun, and so moon square sun is maybe challenging you, saying, well, you can't keep on doing what you're doing. There's something that you haven't got entirely right, or perhaps you have been sort of narrowing your horizons, and so you have to look around you and perhaps ask, where the pressure is, and perhaps that pressure is coming from other people. I mean, the moon is in Capricorn, the moon is in your opposite sign, and so you have to, even if you don't want to, take into consideration, other people's needs, and what other people are telling you. And you don't have to accept what they say, but it just could be that your comfort zone is maybe sort of outliving its usefulness, and you perhaps need a shift. And I think that shift would be good for you. Now, we do have the moon making a square to Saturn and a square to Neptune. Now, the square to Saturn, probably more of an issue if you're in Australia or New Zealand. So if you are a Cancerian in Australasia, I think that moon Saturn could be quite important. Could really be the main aspect of the day, and it might be somewhat frustrating, and you might feel that you just can't do everything you want to do, and you might be aware of the problems presented to you by other people, and relationships may not be great with moon square Saturn. If you're not in Australasia, particularly if you're in the Americas, not particularly Americas. If you're not in, but basically if you're in Europe or the Americas, a more important lunar aspect would be the moon square Neptune. And moon square Neptune, that's quite an interesting aspect. It represents your own uncertainty. I mean, we're all uncertain, and it's not just you. And at some level, Cancer, you may feel that you don't entirely know where you're going, and you've got plans for the future. You've got a sort of theoretical direction for yourself, but you are unsure of yourself. And it could be that the moon square Neptune is about an interaction with another person, or perhaps with just some outside entity, which reminds you of your own uncertainty. And it might be unwelcome. You don't want to be reminded, but you could take an alternative view, and you could see it as an opportunity. Maybe you're being told that you need to get something together. I mean, you are pretty together. You're pretty organized. You're a Cancerian. Many Cancerians are very successful, and they know exactly what they want. But just at the moment, you maybe need a reminder, and someone else's approach, which I don't think you're going to particularly like. It may be just a bit crude, or just too material, too analytical, something you don't appreciate. But it's still a reminder that you need to define yourself better. And so that might be how the moon square to Neptune works. And then the moon does eventually make a sextile to Mars, and this moon sextile Mars is, it's a good aspect, and of course the moon is your ruler. And it might be that if you persevere with other people, for whatever reason, that you can really get something from them. You can gain. And I'm not necessarily talking about gain in a material way, just gain in the sense of, you feeling more useful, happier, feeling that there's a point to it all. So, don't just reject other people just because short term they're asking difficult questions or they're reminding you of things you don't want to be reminded of. In the end, they can come up with the goods, and they can be for you, quite inspiring, and they can kind of sort of move you on and help you to, make the most of, everything that you've got. Leo, the sun is square the moon, and you might say that the sun square moon is the main aspect of the day. I mean, there are not a great deal of aspects today, and so we have to make the most of what we've got. And so this sun square moon, okay, it might be tomorrow if you're in Europe or Asia, Australasia. Well, it will be tomorrow, but if you're in the Americas, it will be today, Monday. But this square moon, maybe it's not about the exact square. We have got the moon in Capricorn square the sun in Libra, and the moon is reminding you that you have ideas. There are things that you want to talk about. There are places you want to go, and it all seems well and good. But then the moon in Capricorn is really asking you, do you have what it takes? And have you really thought it through? And the answer to that question may not be yes. It might be, well, you're not sure, and suddenly you're having to account for yourself, and you're having to maybe sort of write things down. You're being encouraged to make a plan. Maybe you don't want to make plans. I don't think you do, but you're being forced to. And so it might be, Leo, that the best approach is to just accept the situation and realize that if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a map, anything can happen, and that includes nothing at all. And perhaps that's the worst thing that can happen, because you haven't got a plan, because you haven't got any ideas, any clear ideas. Yeah, you've got vague ideas, but nothing clear. Things could just all come to nothing, and that is what the first quarter moon is possibly telling you. And so don't be afraid of the moon moving into Capricorn, but you also need to listen to it, and it is telling you that you need to get yourself together. Especially if you're dealing with something difficult, and this might be a problem that some Leos are having to face. You thought everything was straightforward, but you're aware of an obstacle coming up on the horizon, something that you know about it very well. You know about how limiting it can be, and it's also perhaps a reminder of the past, and there is sort of a whiff of decay when you look at this. Having to deal with something you've dealt with again and again and again. That's where you get the decay. And again, if you don't have a plan, if you don't have a clear idea about how you're going to remove this, then you're not going to remove it. And it just could be some object that has just been around you in your home or outside your home, just something that's just been there that needs to be got rid of. And while it's there, it's just it's just reminding you of the past, and it's reminding you that the past isn't going away until you actually get rid of this thing. And so what you don't want is stagnation. And there is a danger of stagnation, Leo. And stagnation, well, that's not a word one normally associates with Leo, but you have to be aware of it. And you have a chance now to do something about it. And it's the reason you've got this chance is because a light is being shone on it perhaps by this square between the moon and the sun. And at the same time, Leo, I don't want to give the impression that today is going to be awful or anything like that. I think that over the course of the day you will find that people will listen to you. You will be taken seriously. I mean, if you take yourself seriously and you show that you are sort of someone who is definite and you've got plans and you've got ideas and you come over as being vibrant and exciting as far as you can. I mean, it's not a vibrant and exciting day, but if you try your hardest, then I think that people will listen to you. They'll take account of you. They may even do what they're told by you. It's just it requires work, and part of the reason it requires work is because the moon has moved out of Sagittarius. We don't have any planets in fire signs except for Neptune and Chiron, and so your first response to that lack of fire might be just to feel that you don't have the energy, and that links back to stagnation. I mean, stagnation, well, it's there, but you can't remove it. But that you need to make it happen, and you need to make it happen yourself, and that just might mean that you do, to some extent, have to get your hands dirty. Virgo. Venus is still in Virgo, but I want to remind you or point out that Venus is starting to make a conjunction to the South Node. And I don't think I've really talked about this so far, but in a few days' time, Venus will be conjunct the South Node. I mean, let me sort of be more precise about that. I mean, this ephemeris kind of has focuses on the mean node, but I would have said that certainly by Saturday, Venus will be conjunct the South Node. And so what does that mean? Well, if you've got Venus conjunct the South Node, there might be a tendency to, go back to things that you might have thought you had grown out of, and you thought you'd learnt your lesson, and maybe you haven't, and it might be an issue of selfishness at some level. The South Node, we know that the South Node in Virgo, that is very much where you should not be going. I mean, Virgo in your chart is kind of like the first house, so that's putting yourself first, seeing everything in your own terms. And of course, the North Node is in Pisces, which is your opposite sign. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to do everything other people's way. It doesn't mean that you have to give up any of your freedom. That's not what it's about. It's about taking into account the outside world. And, with Venus conjunct the South Node, there's just an increasing danger that you see everything in terms of yourself and the way you see things. And it doesn't occur to you, perhaps, that other people have their own views, and their own views, do have to be taken into consideration. But this Venus conjunct the South Node, we're not there yet. It doesn't really become exact until the weekend. And from a shorter term perspective, the Moon has just gone into Capricorn, or is going into Capricorn. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then the Moon won't go into Capricorn until this evening. But Moon is in Capricorn. It's starting to make a sextile to Venus, which is in Virgo. So, that, as far as I'm concerned, is something you should be happy about. And it's a familiar energy, Virgo, and it allows you to bring yourself, down to earth, and also just do things that you enjoy, but which are also practical. And perhaps you can tune into the practical side of yourself and your personality. And the main thing is that you're able to enjoy yourself. And I think that there's no doubt that you will. And if you're doing the right thing for yourself, then you'll be creating the right kind of energy. And just make sure that you just don't get too obsessed with what you're doing, that you always have to consider what other people are thinking. But that doesn't mean to say that you have to compromise. So you could say that it's it's a day when you don't necessarily absolutely have to do anything. I don't think it's an especially high pressure day. There is a first quarter moon late today or into tomorrow, depending on where you are. And that first quarter moon does affect everyone. And as far as you're concerned, I think it does link with your creativity and doing something that's important for you. And there might be a material sense to that as well. So, Sun in Libra, square Moon in Capricorn. It just could be that, it's not enough just to think of your own benefit. Making, you're not enough to just judge yourself by, for example, your bank balance. There's something else you need to think about, and that relates to perhaps your creativity, doing something that is really worthwhile. So you have to do something perhaps worthwhile that you are also being rewarded for. And maybe that is the challenge of this first quarter moon. Remembering that the new moon, the beginning of a lunation cycle, was at 29 Virgo. So you could say that new moon at 29 Virgo was a new beginning. It was almost a second new beginning, a second chance to start again, because last month, because it's now we're nearly October, but so end of August. So end of August we had a Virgo new moon. Then we had another Virgo new moon. So we had two Virgo new moons. So we had two new beginnings. So, or could have been two new beginnings. So if you missed your first new beginning in August, you had another one just over a week ago. And now you're seeing perhaps the real challenge. And perhaps that real challenge is about doing something that is worthwhile, that is also profitable perhaps, or maybe isn't too expensive, something where you take into consideration money, but not so much that it destroys everything. And so with this first quarter moon, there is pressure on you. You're creating your own pressure to do things which are meaningful and sustainable. And if you take on board the complexities of this first quarter moon, I think it is quite complicated, because you're having to deal with a number of different pressures. There's what society expects of you, there's what people expect of you, but there's also what you expect of yourself, and there's also what you're good at. And if you can bring together all these pressures, then I think that you can really start to make the most of this lunar cycle, which just started just over a week ago. Libra. I've been talking rather a lot about the first quarter moon, and this first quarter moon, it might be late today, might be early tomorrow. This is when the moon is square the sun, moon in Capricorn square the sun in Libra. And I would argue that potentially this first quarter moon is the main event of the day. I mean, it's an important stage of the lunation cycle. And so sun in Libra, this is the Libra season. And I hope you're enjoying it. It's always good to have a Sun in Libra and Mercury in Libra as well. Especially if you are a Libran yourself, and this might put the focus on you and on what you want to do and how you are presenting yourself and projecting yourself as well. And then the moon makes a square to the sun, and this moon square to the sun, it could be a challenge. You have to take into account something that you didn't necessarily want to take into account, and it might be quite fundamental. It perhaps relates to the roots of who you are, and that might include your family and your home and the past, and you perhaps thought it wasn't necessary to give it too much effort and energy, but it's now occurring to you with this first quarter moon that really something needs to be done, that you need to take into account the sort of more basic aspects of life, because if you don't, then you're going to find that this lunar cycle, this very important lunar cycle, this is a lunar cycle that covers, if you like, the Libra season. Even though this lunar cycle started in Virgo with a new moon at 29 Virgo, it's a time to really think about what you need to get together. And even if you're thinking about something very sort of out there in the real world, for example, your work, even then there are fundamental issues to deal with. You can't just look at things in terms of surface appearances, what things look like in the bright lights. You have to think about what the real fundamental issues are, and it's not something that you necessarily want to deal with. But if you want to present yourself with authenticity, and authenticity does matter, and sometimes Librans can have an issue with authenticity. I have to be careful what I say here. It's not that they're inauthentic, it's that Librans are perhaps trying to manage a particular impression because they're thinking about how people what people are thinking about them. What kind of reputation they have. You want everything to be balanced and harmonious, and in the process you can forget the real you, and that's where the inauthenticity can come in. And this first quarter moon is encouraging you to be absolutely authentic, and perhaps that's all you need to do. Just be authentic at every stage of the day. And if you can do that, and I'm not just talking about today, by the way, I'm talking about tomorrow as well, I think you will be making the most of this first quarter moon. And most importantly, you'll be giving yourself the foundations for future success, and you'll be able to really make the most of the Libra season. Scorpio. Moon is making a sextile to Mars. You could say that that's one of the main aspects of the day. It's not a day that is particularly busy. There aren't any sort of major aspects of note going on at the moment, and so that moon sextile Mars perhaps is important, and it's a moon in Capricorn sextile Mars in Scorpio. Now, from a Scorpio point of view, that is good, because Capricorn is the sign where Mars is exalted. So there is definitely a good relationship there between Moon and Mars. And I think that with this Moon-Mars sextile, you're going to be pretty active, and there are lots of things you can do, and there are lots of things you can say, and this is what people want. And we don't have any fire around at the moment because the moon is leaving Sagittarius. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, there will be fire today because the moon is in Sagittarius until this evening. But if you're in America, the moon is not really in Sagittarius. Even in Europe, the moon leaves Sagittarius, late morning. So with that sort of lack of fire, it's not just you that feels it, everyone else, everyone feels it. And so people are looking for something. And Scorpio, it may well be the case, but you're just the person to provide it. So Moon sextile Mars, feel free. You're the one who can create the action. And that action, it could be verbal, or it may be just you doing things which are relatively spontaneous. I say relatively spontaneous because today is not a great day for being spontaneous. And so simply by turning up somewhere unexpected, that may be spontaneous. You might say something which you think is completely obvious, something you've known about for ages, you thought everyone else knew about it, but you say it and it might be a revelation. So you can really get things to move, and you're the one perhaps who has the responsibility to take action because maybe no one else is. And that relates to Mars being in Scorpio, in early Scorpio. Mars is strong in early Scorpio. I mean, I know it's strong throughout the sign Scorpio, but I think it's particularly strong at the beginning of the sign. And the moon making that sextile, it's just about you perhaps being the most active person around. I mean, you might not think that is the case, but I think it could well be the case. And so that could mean that you don't actually have to do very much to make a big impact. Small moves can have large consequences. So perhaps you should really, take advantage of this. And also, Scorpio, it could be that you can afford to be more open and honest. And this connects with the first quarter moon. The sun is in Libra. Moon is moving into Capricorn. So, sun in Libra, from a Scorpio viewpoint, this can be a time of year when many Scorpios, don't really want to do much. They don't want to say much. They want to keep things to themselves. But then the moon making the square to sun in Libra is challenging you. It's saying, well, there are limits to how secretive you can be. Some things have to be revealed, because if you keep things to yourself forever, well, what's the point? You don't want to take your secrets to the grave, do you? And they're not really secrets. They're ideas and insights which everyone can benefit from. And if you want to benefit from your own ideas, at some stage you do have to reveal them. And the moon square sun, that's what the challenge is about. And because the moon is making a sextile to Mars as well, I think that you can take your ideas and take your plans and you can really present them very effectively. And I think that people will listen to you and they will take you seriously. Though it's not a time for Scorpios to be getting too close to anyone. It's not because anyone is dangerous. It's just the environment isn't right. And on an emotional level, it is going to be difficult to relate. I think on an intellectual level, it's fine. I think that you'll have no problems once you start communicating your ideas. But when it comes to your deeper feelings, it's not so clear. And so that could mean that getting really close to someone is just difficult because it feels that someone is holding something back. It may be you holding something back. And perhaps, Scorpio, you're still looking after your own interests, and you are aware of your vulnerabilities, particularly your emotional vulnerabilities. I'm not saying you're emotionally vulnerable, by the way. I'm just saying that you might feel emotionally vulnerable. And so because of that, there are limits to what you're going to want to give away on an emotional level. But on an intellectual level, I think that you can be free and open. Sagittarius. The moon is leaving your sign. And I don't know how you felt about moon being in Sagittarius. I mean, it should have been good. It should have given you an idea about what can be done. And hopefully you were an exciting and dynamic person while the moon was in Capricorn, the moon was in Sagittarius. And this should have given you, insights into, what you could do in the future. And then, the moon moving out of Sagittarius moves into Capricorn, and you have to start to think about what needs to be done in the here and now. Moon is in Capricorn, and it's square the sun. And so moon in Capricorn could be about you starting to think about where you need to put in sort of extra work, and where you just don't have the resources. And resources could be important because you have hopes, you have plans, you're thinking about the future. You want the future to be as good as possible, but when the moon moves into Capricorn, it makes a square to the sun, first quarter moon. And this first quarter moon might sort of just make you think about the things you don't have, and the things you need, and the things that you need to get hold of. And so that could be quite motivating. And so you hopefully will use the pressure of a first quarter moon, because it is challenging, a first quarter moon, and it can be a moment of crisis. You'll use that pressure to decide, what needs to be done. When you think about where you want to be in 5 or 10 years' time, what do you need to do? And so, it could be a time where you need to start to think about money, or managing money, or it just could be just something you need to get hold of. It might be just some three-dimensional object that you need to get your hands on. You maybe want to get your hands on it for as cheaply as possible. You maybe don't want to pay anything at all. Maybe it's possible to get something for free. But it's just something you need, and something of a sort of material nature. So that first quarter moon, it's a bit boring. It sounds a bit boring, but just because it's boring doesn't mean it's not important. And I think it really is important. Now, on a different note, I think that it can be quite an interesting day. I mean, you do have Jupiter, which is your ruler, and if you look at Jupiter, you will notice that it is on the Venus-Uranus midpoint. You see, there's Venus, there's Uranus. So Venus and Uranus kind of have a sort of a square relationship to it. I mean, it's a long way off. I mean, Venus is 11 degrees off the square with Uranus, but Jupiter is right in the middle, right between Venus and Uranus. And while Jupiter occupies this space, and it's not just about today, I mean, perhaps sort of early in the week, with Jupiter on the Venus-Uranus midpoint, that does indicate that there can be excitement, and you can benefit from other people. You can certainly be excited by other people, and people might not do things that you were expecting. And so if you see someone behaving unusually, don't be upset by it. try to work out what's going on. And if you sort of really look at the situation, it may be an opportunity. Even if it's not an opportunity, it's at least something interesting going on. And so it really does matter that you don't underestimate other people, and also don't forget that Uranus is in Gemini. Uranus is in your opposite sign, and this is a time when other people can just confound your expectations. And it's not just now. I mean, Uranus in Gemini is going to be in Gemini, on and off for the next, I don't know, I should have checked the ephemeris beforehand, but the next 6 years or something like that. And you could say that Jupiter being on the Venus-Uranus midpoint is really stirring it all up. And so, make the most of other people, and don't be too defensive. I mean, I think you could be defensive, because I think that at the moment, like it or not, you are looking after your own interests, but you must be ready to be surprised. You must give other people a chance to surprise you, and you really mustn't have too many expectations. And this applies to people at all levels, and including people you know very well. So people you know very well might do something unexpected or say something unexpected, and particularly if you give them a chance. And so give everyone the freedom they need so that they can be themselves. And if people really are able to be themselves, then that's going to work in your favor as well. Capricorn. I've been making quite a big deal of the first quarter moon. First quarter moon sort of takes place sort of late today, early tomorrow, early on Tuesday, depending on your time zone. And I do think that this first quarter moon could be important for you. And this first quarter moon is in Capricorn, because the moon is in Capricorn. It's square the sun in Libra, so moon in a cardinal sign. So is the sun. So yeah, it is relevant. So while sun has been in Libra, it's been in Libra for sort of nearly a week, I've been talking about how this could be quite motivating. And perhaps you've been thinking about, what you want to achieve and how you want to project your ideas. And it could well have been about sort of work and status and your ambitions. But, it's not necessarily about work. It can be about other things. It's whatever it is that you want to project, sort of projecting your ego. This is about you having an impact on the world, that sun in Libra. And then the moon making a square to the sun, well, that is a challenging aspect. It's a dynamic aspect. And it's sort of asking you, well, do you have what it takes? Well, you certainly have what it takes. But perhaps so far you've forgotten something. This lunar cycle, which started with a new moon at 29 degrees Virgo, is, it's only just started. And perhaps you have been thinking a great deal about what you wanted to achieve, the kind of effects you wanted to achieve, but you weren't maybe thinking so much about yourself. You weren't being entirely centered. And now that the moon is in Capricorn, you are starting to think about yourself and what you can do, and also to an extent what you can't do. And so with this moon square sun, with this first quarter moon, it's a moment where you have to consider what is possible. And maybe at some level you hadn't taken yourself sufficiently seriously, and it's also possible that you had allowed external forces to make up your mind for you, or at least start to make up your mind for you. But now, with the moon in Capricorn, things change. You are in a position, where you can take control, and it's important that you're not confused. I mean, you could, to begin with, be confused, because Neptune is in Aries, so the moon makes a square to Neptune, then it makes a square to the sun. And so to an extent, but Neptune is kind of tied up with this first quarter moon. And so it could be that you have a few doubts, perhaps doubts relating to the past, that Neptune in Aries, things which happened long ago, things which are essential to who you are, but things that you don't necessarily understand and fully understand. I mean, you understand them perhaps emotionally, but not intellectually. And so you perhaps have to navigate all of that. And yeah, that might be the challenge of this first quarter moon. But because the moon is in Capricorn, because it's in your sign, you absolutely know fundamentally what needs to be done. And self-respect absolutely matters. So it's essential that you are given the respect you deserve, regardless of where it's coming from. If you're in a job, you've got employers. Well, your employers need to respect you. If you're someone in a sort of elevated status and there are people below you in the hierarchy, make sure that they respect you. So respect does matter, and you should be expecting respect. And at the same time, you know how to gain respect. That shouldn't be a problem. Now, if you want to make a few changes as far as personnel, I don't necessarily mean personnel in a sort of a working sense, just personnel, the people around you, whoever it is you have to deal with, whoever it is that you want to spend your time with, you are becoming aware of the limitations of certain people, and maybe respect is part of it. You can see that maybe some people are systematically not respecting you, and that's becoming clear. And that means that you've got some decisions to make. Are there ways in which you can demand respect? Or if someone is refusing to respect you, do you need to be so close to them? Maybe you should distance yourself from them, put yourself in a situation where you're not reliant on them. So these are the kind of changes that you should perhaps be thinking about with this first quarter moon. It's not something that you necessarily want to do, but it might nonetheless be important. And talking about people, there is a sextile between the moon and Mars, and this Moon-Mars sextile does indicate that in the right circumstances, you can be very sociable and be someone who is very compelling, and people will, very much sort of listen to you. Mars is in Scorpio, and Mars, in a way, is a ruler of Capricorn. I mean, I know that Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn, the main ruler, but don't forget Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So by exaltation, you could argue that Mars represents you, especially now when the moon is in Capricorn. So the moon is in the moon is in the exaltation sign of Mars. So there is that relationship between you and Mars, and the fact that the moon is sextile Mars at the moment, really does indicate to me that if you want to be powerful, then you certainly can be. And if you throw yourself into your social life, then you can really make a mark. Of course, you don't want to throw yourself into your social life in some kind of random way. You want to be very focused about it, but you're a Capricorn. I think that you can manage that. So I think it's a day when you need to be in the center of things, and I think that you have to be fully aware of how powerful you can be. Aquarius. The main thing going on today is possibly a square between the moon and the sun, the first quarter moon. I've been talking a lot about the first quarter moon, and the moon is in Capricorn, and the sun is in Libra, and this first quarter moon is not necessarily apparent. I mean, it's not apparent to other people. When people look at what's going on, they don't see anything changing. But for you, Aquarius, this first quarter moon might be about just working things through. And you are quite inspired at the moment, but some of the inspirations you have lead in interesting and maybe uncomfortable areas. You see things for the first time and you realize that things aren't quite as straightforward as you thought they were, and you then have to decide, well, what do you do about it? And you can't do anything immediately. You have to sort of keep a lot to yourself, and perhaps that's what today is about. Just thinking, working out what is possible, and just not necessarily revealing much. Because if you were to just tell people what's on your mind directly, without any filter, they might not understand what you're talking about, or they might feel threatened, or it just could be that the words just don't come out right. Having said that, there is a sextile between the moon and Mars, and this moon-Mars sextile, I think, it's pretty good, and I think it can work in your favor, because Mars in Scorpio is it's in a high-profile part of your chart. As I've already said, Mars in Scorpio for Aquarians can be very ambitious. It can be about what you want to achieve, and so with Moon sextile Mars, there are ways of getting closer to your ambitions, but in such a way that no one notices. And so that's another reason why you want to keep quiet about things. Because, if you keep quiet about things, there's no resistance. You don't have to answer difficult questions. So you can sort of quietly work away on something. And at the same time, you can be incredibly ambitious. And it all works out very well. And so if there's something you want to do secretly, and you kind of know that if people were to find out what you were doing, they might respond badly because they don't understand. I mean, it could be a situation where there is a competitive element. Your benefit is another person's loss. I mean, that's not very nice, but it is a reality. And so if you are dealing with a competitive situation, then it is a time to prepare your ground and to prepare the advantage, because I think you really do have an advantage, but you'd have to be a bit devious about it. And of course, we've also got Saturn, your ruler, retrograde, and so Saturn retrograde in Pisces, that does perhaps show a side to Aquarius that we were not usually aware of. At least it shows a side to an Aquarius right now. Saturn in Pisces being a person who is behind the scenes, retrograde, certainly not being clear. And so it could be, Aquarius, today, that the less clarity there is, the better for you, provided that deep down, in terms of yourself, the way you're thinking about things, you yourself are crystal clear. So that's the difference. Yeah, you can be crystal clear about your intentions, about what you want, but in terms of interacting with other people, you don't need to have any clarity at all, I don't think. Pisces. The moon is in Capricorn, and it's making a sextile to Mars. So the moon is pretty well placed from a Piscean perspective. Okay, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, the moon will be in Sagittarius. So that's for most of the day. So that's slightly different. And so perhaps I need to sort of deal with those two situations sort of separately. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand, moon in Sagittarius squares Saturn. And okay, you might get that to an extent in other parts of Asia maybe, but you're going to be I think, quite motivated, and you're going to want to really push forward with whatever your ambitions are. Whatever you want to do, just do it. And it's Monday. It's the beginning of a week. There's something you need to get together, and you need to be very clear, and perhaps be quite harsh with the moon in Sagittarius at square Saturn. Yeah, you have your ideas, but ideas on their own don't really mean very much unless you actually give them some real grounding. Now, if you're not in Australasia, if you're in Europe or the Americas, things are slightly different. I would have said, Pisces, that things are going to be softer, perhaps. There's not going to be so much pressure. Even though the moon is in Capricorn, of course, the moon in Capricorn has certain negative connotations. It has a reputation for being selfish, but it's not quite like that moon square Saturn. And so if you've got the moon in Capricorn, coming up, so in other words, if you're in Europe, Africa, the Americas, if you've got moon in Capricorn for most of the day, then you can perhaps afford to be more sociable, more relaxed, because you're still going to be able to look after your own best interests. No problem there. And remember, Saturn is in Pisces, and you've got the North Node in Pisces as well. So this is a time where Pisceans can focus on themselves, but with moon in Capricorn, think about other people you might want to talk to, find out about, and it may be necessary to interact with other people, because if you don't, you might be forced to keep things to yourself so much that you haven't got a clue what's going on. Because if you are concerned about something and you think about it again and again and again, it can all become rather obsessive. And so what you need is other people to relate to, so that you can tell them what's going on in your mind, explain it somehow. And it might not be 100% easy, but I think in the end you'll get the understanding you need. And furthermore, you're going to be helped by the fact that the moon is making a sextile to Mars. So moon sextile Mars suggests to me that social connections can really be very useful. And it's not just about unburdening your own feelings and insights. It's also about learning something new. And that matters. And Mars is moving through Scorpio until the beginning of November, and while Mars is moving through Scorpio, it's a time where Pisceans should be putting a fair amount of energy into discovering the world around them, to just discover what's going on, to discover things that they don't understand, bring those sort of mysteries out into the open. And you can do that at the moment through social interaction, asking questions, and ideally you'll focus on people who just know things that you don't know. I mean, you don't know everything. No one can know everything, and people have knowledge and experience that you can benefit from. And so, give them the chance to explain, and give yourself the chance to ask questions, because if you ask questions, I think you might get some very interesting answers. So those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and I now want to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was possession in great measure. And this hexagram is often regarded as being very fortunate. I mean, the name sounds fortunate, doesn't it? You got a huge amount in great measure. And there is even the implication that you can make gains, that if you haven't got something, you can get hold of it. And so possession in great measure does indicate that really things are looking good. But the third line moves. Third line from the bottom moves. And so the third line in the I Ching can often be problematic. And even though we do have a lot, there is some possibility that we overreach, but we just take things too far. And if we start to take things too far, we may get a negative response. People might not appreciate it. And it's therefore important that we don't show off what we have. Yeah, we've got a lot, possession in great measure, but if we show off, we're going to lose friends. We're going to lose influence. And also, we mustn't be too possessive about what we have, because possession can become possessive. And so we may be really focused on holding on to what we have, so much so that we are repressing something. And this is going to cause problems in a social sense, and perhaps also in a spiritual sense, because if we hold on to everything so tightly, we lose it, because there's no motion, there's no flow, and it starts to decay. And that is not something that we want. But the fifth line moves, and the fifth line is just telling us how to behave. It's telling us that if we are sincere and honest and open, and we understand our position, perhaps relative to authority, we have our position, we don't go too far, we don't overreach ourselves, and we get the respect we deserve. And it's just important that we do show some modesty in our possessions. So we can use our possessions, and we can be recognized for what we have. And when I talk about have, I'm really talking about our knowledge, our wisdom, our experience. So we get that recognition, but we don't want to boast about it. I mean, that is important. And then, because you've got two moving lines, we move to a second hexagram. And what we move to is hexagram number 10, which is treading. And of course, this is about walking past the tiger and not treading on the tiger's tail. So having a lot of possessions, again, not necessarily material possessions, not necessarily loads of money in the bank, and having all of that, we just need to move forward, but we need to move forward carefully. Very important not to show off, because we don't want to upset the tiger. If we step on the tiger's tail, we could be in trouble. So we have to look after what we have and understand that we're living in a complicated world, a complicated social situation for us, and so we do have to tread very carefully. And this might indicate, for example, that there's a lot of jealousy flying around, and people might look at what we have and not appreciate it, or they might regard us as being too arrogant. That's another possibility, but it's all unnecessary if we're prepared to tread carefully. And finally, I want to consider or reconsider Pluto in Aquarius. So Pluto is in Aquarius. It's been in Aquarius for quite a long time. Now, I'm warning you, in this last section, it's probably going to be a bit chaotic. There are a couple of charts I want to look at. Also, I will be looking at some old ground. So the last time Pluto went into Aquarius was November the 19th, 2024, because it went retrograde between 2023, 2024. It went into Aquarius, and it went back into Capricorn. But the final time it goes into Aquarius is November the 19th, and it's going to be in Aquarius now for a long time. I think until the 2040s, isn't that right? Something like that. So it's something that we really do need to think about very carefully. Let me just clarify that. I said the 2040s. So 2040, Pluto will still be in Aquarius. I think it's starts to move into Pisces. Well, certainly 2043 it moves. There's a movement into Pisces. So it's a long time. So 18 years. So that's something that we're really stuck in here. Pluto in Aquarius, and it does appear, from what we've seen, that Pluto in Aquarius is working very well. When I say very well, we can see the symbolism, left, right, and center. Now, when we think about the sign Aquarius, there are a number of ways of looking at Aquarius. It's often seen as being about technology and about invention and also sort of revolution. And this is a reason why many people used to regard Uranus as a ruler of Aquarius. And when I started studying astrology, Uranus was seen, I think, as being the official ruler of this sign. Things have changed. I think that there has been sort of a backlash against modern astrology, and the traditional rulers have reasserted themselves, and I am absolutely convinced that Uranus does not rule Aquarius. However, I'm absolutely prepared to accept that Uranus has an association with Aquarius. Now, that is an important difference. So, for example, if you're doing a chart, a traditional chart, for example, you're doing a horary chart and you see the sign Aquarius, you say Saturn is ruler of that sign. And so, for example, if you're doing a horary chart, you've got Aquarius rising, the querent would be Saturn, would not be Uranus. So that's the rulership bit. With the association, I'm comfortable with Uranus being associated with Aquarius, and that does give us some extra information about what Aquarius is, and this idea that Aquarius might be to do with revolution and technology seems to me to be quite reasonable. And of course, we've got the sort of the AI obsession. I mean, AI has been sort of creeping up on us, but it's all you hear about. People are losing their jobs because of AI. In terms of the markets, it's all about what AI is doing to the stock market. How Nvidia has been just sort of going up and up and up, and some people are saying it's just going to keep going up. There's no limit to how far Nvidia can go up. I'm not saying that, by the way. I'm just saying what people say, and so that is Pluto in Aquarius. So from an AI perspective, Pluto has really, I think, worked extremely well. And if you ever use ChatGPT, I mean, to my mind, it's just magic almost. I mean, I don't know how this thing works. I mean, obviously, I do logically know how it works, but it is kind of quite frightening how powerful or how effective ChatGPT is, at least from my sort of naive viewpoint. But Aquarius is not just about technology. And we shouldn't forget that Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, and Aquarius is a sign that is connected with, on one hand, totalitarianism and the power of the state, the active power of the state. That is a difference between Capricorn and Aquarius. Capricorn it's a traditional sign, Capricorn. It's a negative sign. It's a feminine sign. So that's who would be Capricorn. It's ruled by Saturn. But Aquarius is a positive sign, masculine sign. It's still ruled by Saturn. And so it is about the state perhaps actively wanting to take control of people's lives. But there's another side to Aquarius, perhaps the Uranus side, the association that Uranus has, and that is the desire for freedom. People really want their freedom at the same time as governments want to take away that freedom. So you've got these two pressures just appearing almost sort of simultaneously. And Pluto has only just gone into Aquarius. I'm thinking that Pluto in Aquarius is going to be as obvious as Pluto in Scorpio. Pluto in Scorpio completely worked when Pluto was in Scorpio in the 80s, particularly with AIDS. I mean, that just described Pluto in Scorpio just completely. It was sort of early 1980s, when just as the AIDS, HIV epidemics started, and that changed everything. I mean, certainly in terms of people's attitude to sex, and I don't think things ever got back again after after Pluto went into Scorpio. And I think it's looking like it's the same thing with Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto in Aquarius is a big deal, and Pluto, was in Aquarius at the end of the 18th century, and we saw the themes of revolution and government oppression. Okay, in 1776, when the United States signed the Declaration of Independence, Pluto was in Capricorn, but it hadn't been discovered yet. But I think planets can still work before they're discovered. But as the Revolutionary War progressed, Pluto went forward, and Pluto went into Aquarius. So there is a real Pluto in Aquarius sort of feel to what was perhaps going on in the United States. And it wasn't just about freedom. It was also about the government asserting itself. For example, George Washington, when he was president, he had to put down the Whiskey Rebellion when people resented having to pay tax on whiskey. I don't know the precise details, but there are people who thought that was just government interference. But George Washington had to put down that rebellion. I mean, he did it quite reasonably. I don't think it wasn't a particularly brutal suppression, but it was an expression of government force. And then the French Revolution, Pluto was in Aquarius. I mean, that is pure Pluto in Aquarius. It's people wanting their freedom, storming of the Bastille, but then you have a new government imposing a new system, a real year zero system. When you had you changed the months, you had Thermidor, and you had at its extreme level, you had different 10 days in a week. You really started from scratch, and so that's real Pluto, and that's real Pluto in Aquarius for you. And so I think that we're starting to see this manifest down in the world here, and it's certainly in Europe. And I was reminded of Pluto in Aquarius when sort of Keir Starmer made his announcement in the UK about the digital ID card. And I'm not living in the UK. But this was when he made the announcement. I think it was at 11 a.m. on September the 26th, 2025. And it was flagged the day before. The day before, on September 25th, people said, oh, Keir Starmer is about to make an announcement about digital ID cards. But so you could say I could be looking at the planets for the day before. But I think the formal announcement, Keir Starmer saying, oh, you've got to have a digital ID. Now, if you're in another country in Europe, you might not regard this as being particularly important. I mean, there are countries in Europe where it is compulsory to have an ID card, and so that's quite natural for many Europeans. And sort of digital ID, I think there are in China, for example, or I think in Estonia they have a digital ID. So it's, for many countries, it's not particularly unusual, but for Britain it's really unusual, because Britain, it's not an ID card kind of culture. And of course, Keir Starmer was saying that, it will help with reducing immigration, keeping a tag on immigrants. If you haven't got a digital ID card, you can't claim benefits. I think that's just a way of trying to make it look good. I mean, the reality is with this digital ID card, in the end, is that you may be able to sort of control people's money, their bank accounts. And if you bring together their health and their bank accounts, it's something that people are very worried about in the UK. And so, here is a chart for when he made this announcement, and as of course, Pluto is in Aquarius, and Mars is square Pluto. So Mars was square Pluto last week, and the exact moment that Mars was square Pluto was pretty much when there was that attack on that ICE office in Dallas. So you could say Mars square Pluto, that is sort of an attack on a government office. But in Starmer's case, we could say that Mars was just triggering Pluto. Mars was just indicating that this was the time when Pluto was going to manifest. And so Mars brought this out into the open, and of course Mars square Pluto, it drove people crazy. If you look at what people in Britain are saying, if you look at YouTube, people are just really, really upset about it, and across the political spectrum, people on the left, people on the right, people progressives, no one is happy about these digital ID cards. But it's such a Pluto in Aquarius thing. Although I think that you might want to compare this chart for Starmer introducing digital ID cards with the introduction of the Ken Carta. So what is the Ken Carta? I probably mispronounced it. It's a German word. And the Ken Carta was introduced by the Nazis in July the 22nd, 1938. I believe Ken relates to knowledge. It's about you can know everything about someone from their card. So on July the 22nd, 1938, the Nazis had an ordinance that basically every male 15 or over had to carry a Ken Carta, and it was just an ID. But probably for the from sort of 1938 perspective, that was something quite dramatic. And so I was then interested about what are the connections, what are the links between the Ken Carta, the introduction of the Ken Carta, and Starmer introducing the digital ID. And so looking at the two sort of astrologically. I'll put the Ken Carta on the inner wheel. No, I'll put Starmer's ID on the inner wheel, and I'll put the Ken Carta on the outer wheel. And when the Ken Carta was introduced, the North Node was at 24 degrees Scorpio, and at the time Starmer started his speech at 11 a.m., there was a black moon Lilith conjunction at 24 Scorpio, right on the North Node of the introduction of the Ken Carta. And sort of additionally, we had, if we look at Venus, Venus was pretty close. We had sort of Venus was pretty much in the same position. Venus was in Virgo at the same time, and Neptune was on the South Node. So the South Node is in Virgo. So the South Node in Virgo was sort of picking up on the Neptune at the same time as the Ken Carta was introduced. All of those years ago. I mean, I don't know whether it's particularly relevant to make the comparison, but going back to the Mars-Pluto thing that I was talking about, so Keir Starmer made this speech when Mars was square Pluto. So that does indicate Mars square Pluto can be about power, wanting to be in control. And the Ken Carta was introduced by the Nazis when Mars was exactly conjunct Pluto. So Mars and Pluto were only 2 minutes apart when the Ken Carta was introduced on July the 22nd, 1938. And so when Starmer made his speech at 11 a.m., Mars and Pluto were square. And the announcement on Friday. His speech was on the Friday. The actual announcement, when it became clear that he was going to introduce a digital ID, was done the day before. So the Mars-Pluto square would have been even closer. So there is perhaps a Mars-Pluto feel to the concept of identity cards, wanting to be in control. And of course, here we've got Mars. Mars is square Pluto in Aquarius, wanting to be in control. And so the concept of a digital identity card, that is pure Pluto in Aquarius. And of course, there are other things that came out which are very Pluto in Aquarius, certainly in terms of the UK. And one thing was that apparently the Bank of England has speculated that what they want is to limit holdings in stable coins of individuals to between £10,000 and £20,000, and companies £10,000. So that is very, very draconian. This idea that an unelected body can tell people where they put their money. So you cannot buy any sort of reasonable quantity of stable coins, because the bank is, of course, afraid that if people have stable coins, they can just keep their money in a private wallet. And a stable coin is backed by a dollar. I mean, in theory, if it works well, it's backed dollar for dollar. So you will, or pound for pound, or whatever, however the stable coin is created. So why do people need banks if they have got stable coins? If they can get the transaction fees to close to zero, then stable coins would seem to be something really quite useful. And I've heard that if people, if you're going to visit Russia, with all these sort of restrictions on Russia, it's good to have stable coins on your phone. So you've got stable coins so you can pay your way going through Russia. I don't know whether that's true, but I've heard that. So Britain seems to be really in the eye of the storm as far as Pluto going into Aquarius is concerned, and this is kind of highlighted by things that happened in the recent past. So remember, you had a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on December the 21st, 2020, and I've looked at this chart, quite a lot. And as far as I'm concerned, this chart, I've set this chart for London, and this chart says that it really does suggest that this is the decline of Britain in quite a major way, because at the moment of that conjunction, there was the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction was on the descendant set for Britain. So that really does indicate a decline. This is the end of something, because that emphasis on the descendant. And then if you look at Pluto, so Pluto goes into Aquarius. So what happens is that when Pluto goes into Aquarius, it's picking up on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Now, that affects all of us, regardless of what country we're in or what our citizenship is, because it's telling us that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, with Pluto moving into Aquarius, well, it is all about government control, but also people getting really upset, resisting the government. And so we're seeing it all. And of course, it's also about AI. So that's the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction set for 2020. So when Pluto first went into Aquarius on March the 23rd, 2023 at 12:13 p.m., and you set the chart for London, you see Pluto is on the descendant. So Pluto is really having an impact on the UK the first time it goes round. And you look at the last time it went round, when Pluto went into Aquarius, at the end of last November, on November the 19th, again Pluto is on the 7th house cusp. So it's really, really impacting Britain, this whole Pluto in Aquarius thing. And so the government is trying its hardest, certainly on a financial level, to control people's lives, and also people getting arrested for social media posts, and you know, that seems to me, really, really dramatic. You say something on social media, you even if you erase it 3 hours later, you could still spend 31 months in prison, like Lucy Connolly. So control, Pluto and Aquarius, we're certainly seeing it in the UK, and I think we're seeing Pluto really start to work. And it's it's not just about the UK. It's happening all over Europe. And I saw this story that there was a mayoral election in a town in Germany called Ludwigshafen, and the mayor, one of the mayoral candidates, he wasn't allowed to stand. He was an AfD candidate, and the reason he wasn't allowed to stand was apparently because he'd said positive things about Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and he'd associated it with conservatism, and some court had decided he was dangerous, and they've just had the election. And normally there was a turnout of 60%, apparently, in Wilhelmshaven, but this time round the turnout was only 29%. So you can see perhaps Pluto in Aquarius manifesting there in both its forms in Ludwigshafen. In Ludwigshafen, Pluto in Aquarius, the state telling a candidate that he can't stand, banning a candidate because of his beliefs. He's considered to be a threat to the constitution. And then at the same time, the people in Ludwigshafen showing their displeasure by not turning up to vote. So turnout going down from 60% down to something like 29%. So again, that is Pluto in Aquarius. And I think that with Pluto in Aquarius, there is, certainly from a German perspective, one might want to think that a way of looking at Pluto in Aquarius could be there's this German word, forgive my pronunciation, called Gleichschaltung, and Gleichschaltung means same circuit. And Gleichschaltung was a word used by the Nazis to describe the kind of system they wanted to create, where you had complete coordination. Everything is coordinated, everything is synchronized, everything is running on the same circuit. And perhaps this is what is happening. Some of the shadows from the past are starting to reveal themselves, and this may go back to Aquarius. And so if you look at the horoscope of Nazi Germany, then Nazi Germany had 3 planets in Aquarius. It had Mercury, Saturn, Sun in Aquarius. So it's a very sort of archetypal thing, this chart, and it's just set the seeds of something, maybe. And it's also reminding us that Aquarius is a sign that is totalitarian. It's about the active control of the state. This is not just a state that wants vaguely to be in control. It wants to be in complete control. It wants to certainly bring in its ID cards, its Ken Carter. It also wants to run everything according to the same circuit. It does not want any deviance. So perhaps the ghosts from the past are starting to reveal themselves. And it's kind of interesting then that if you look at the horoscope for German unification set for Berlin rather than Bonn, you have Leo rising, but you have Aquarius on the 7th house cusp. And so Mercury, Nazi Germany had always planets in Aquarius. So the shadow of German unification, this supposedly this nice, happy, democratic Germany, you've got this shadow, the seventh house in Aquarius, and that shadow represents the past, and it's doesn't take much for the past to reveal itself. And when the Pluto moves into Aquarius, it seems that current modern Germany is trying to run itself on the same circuit. There is perhaps an increasing Gleichschaltungization of German society going on, where, if you have divergent opinions, you get removed, like this candidate for the mayor of Ludwigshafen. And I think that this is perhaps Pluto in Aquarius in operation. And maybe you can see this with the European Union as well. So if you look at the European Union chart, so here is the where's the EU chart? Here's the EU chart. Like Germany, the European Union chart has got Leo rising and Aquarius in the seventh house cusp. So okay, it doesn't sort of link up perhaps with Nazi Germany's chart quite so well, but it's that thing, that shadow that the European Union, says, oh, it's all about fighting fascism, resisting fascism. We don't want to have any fascism in the European Union, but it's fascistic itself, and yet like we see with Germany. So and I think that that Pluto moving into Aquarius is just it is really bringing up these things from the past, and I think that it is perhaps quite terrifying. So people in Germany with Pluto in Aquarius, they're so keen, they're so desperate not to be fascist, not to be Nazi, that they are actually becoming fascists themselves. They are becoming the very things they're trying to avoid. And Pluto in Aquarius is bringing that all up. So as far as the United States is concerned, it's perhaps it's a different battle. I mean, I'm sure that if you are a progressive in the United States, you would see free speech being increasingly encroached upon. Although, if Kamala Harris had won, I suspect, rather than Donald Trump in 2024, I think that some of the problems that we're seeing in Germany at the moment, and Germany, we would probably start to see it in the US, for example, the government wanting to control social media. But of course, Trump still is not too comfortable with freedom of expression everywhere. I mean, it depends on your view. I'm trying to be unbiased here. I mean, you've got a situation in America, for example, if you're a professor in a conservative state, and in a university in a conservative state, you have to be careful, and you're a progressive, you have to be careful about your emails, because you might be worried that your emails are read and you might get fired. On the other hand, if you are a conservative professor in a democratic state, in a democratic biased institution, likewise you have to watch your emails, you have to watch what you write. So it doesn't really matter whether you're on the left or the right. You still have to watch what you say. And again, I think that this is Pluto in Aquarius coming into action. But I was also thinking about Donald Trump and Pluto in Aquarius, and it's kind of interesting that Donald Trump, he does have Pluto in Leo, and you could argue that from a positive point of view, if you are a Trump supporter, I'm not a Trump supporter, but I'm just looking at it from a perspective of a Trump supporter who's into astrology, is that you're saying that Pluto in Aquarius is about totalitarianism, and you're seeing Pluto in Aquarius strongly manifest in Europe and the UK. And you could say that his Pluto in Leo is sort of fighting back against it. It's Pluto in Leo is not comfortable with Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto in Leo represents perhaps the individual, the power of the individual, and he's standing up against how Pluto in Aquarius is manifesting in Europe. And you might even say the same thing about J.D. Vance. So J.D. Vance, obviously he doesn't have Pluto in Leo because he's born in 1984. Kind of interesting, he's born in 1984, maybe being born in 1984. He has a strong awareness of the issues that George Orwell was talking about in his book. But Vance has his Sun and Venus in Leo, and so he doesn't have anything in Aquarius. And so perhaps as someone who has got Sun and Venus in Leo, at a time when Pluto is in Aquarius, maybe Vance is particularly aware of certain aspects of Pluto in Aquarius, particularly in a European context. And it's not just that. He has got his Mars. He's got his Mars in Scorpio. So his Mars in Scorpio is kind of sort of clashing against some of the things going on in the European Union. So if you, for example, compare the European Union with Vance, so if we put the EU in the middle wheel, we put J.D. Vance on the outer wheel. J.D. Vance's Mars is right on the European Union's Mars, just 2 degrees off, and so his Sun is his Saturn. So Vance's Saturn in Scorpio is square the European Union's Sun. So perhaps he is challenging this, and that's perhaps his talk at the Munich conference when he criticised the sort of erosion of freedom in Europe. And additionally, the EU's Saturn at 23 degrees Aquarius is opposition his ascendant. So perhaps as Vance having Sun, Venus, ascendant in Leo, he finds something very troubling about what is going on in Europe, and particularly what is going on in Europe now that Pluto has gone into Aquarius. So those are a few thoughts about Pluto in Aquarius. As you can see, it was a complete ramble, but I thought I wanted to say something. Maybe I'll try to produce a more coherent video on the subject at a later stage. But thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.